Welcome everybody in today's CellTalk presentation on Translational Longevity series. Today, Dr. Divya Lakshmi Ramakrishna will talk about Eat Right for Healthy Long Life. Dr. Divya Lakshmi Ramakrishna is a scientific content writer and team lead at Renix Life Sciences since 2 years, where she has gained experience in operational, managerial, and administrative roles along with scientific activities. She has an explicit writing skills to present the articles in required formats such as blogs, white papers, disease summary, descriptions, posters, reviews, etc. in various medical specialties with main focus on oncology. She is involved in enhancing the scientific research content collected from wide spectrum of literature to reach the target audience like patients, healthcare professionals, clinicians, etc. Currently, she is actively involved in content creation of the Clinical Gene Maps project. Presently, at Renix Life Sciences, she is managing multiple teams such as the content team, data acquisition, and health analytics, and is successful in completing the deliverables from the teams through planning, task allocation, guidance, reviews, and approvals. She is also experienced in proofreading, editing, and reviewing of the documents written by other team members. Recently, she has played a major role in the initiation and execution of major projects related to healthcare monitoring of senior citizens and rural healthcare program. So let's welcome Dr. Divya Lakshmi for today's presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Nupur, for this elaborate introduction. So today I will be highlighting the topic of eat right for healthy long life. And these are the references which I have considered. So as Hippocrates said, let food be thy medicine and let thy medicine be food. And we are all aware of it, and we also accept this to a certain extent, I suppose. So his wisdom has again proven true, because we all know that altering the level, type, and the timing of food consumption is the most feasible, potent, and the safest intervention to improve our health and thus also to extend longevity. Now, despite extensive research, the type, quantity, and the combination of foods or the nutrients that optimize a healthy longevity is still highly controversial. And understanding and harnessing these evolutionary conserved mechanisms, in addition to personalizing the dietary interventions, is the key to optimize human health span as well as longevity. As we all know, the average life expectancy of an individual is increasing among the world population, and eating the right way and living a healthy life is the main goal of all of us. And the practice of healthy dietary patterns will in turn help to prevent the development of various age-related diseases like cardiovascular disease, neurodegenerative disorders, cancers, and which are also known as these non-communicable diseases. And this in turn will affect the life expectancy as well as the healthy lifespan of individuals. Now, as we all know, the diet as a whole, which encompasses the food composition, calorie intake, as well as the length and the frequency of the fasting periods, it affects the time span in which health and functional capacity are maintained. Now, these nutritional strategies are also shown to delay the aging process or prevent the diseases through various epidemiological, clinical, and the centenarian studies. And this is mainly attributed to the need to avoid malnourishment. And these findings are further integrated in order to define a longevity diet by a multi-system and a multi-pillar approach. Based on the research over a century, the definition of a longevity diet may also represent a solid foundation for the nutritional recommendation and for future research. In this context, the blue zones are the few areas of the globe which are highly populated by these centenarians, and they provided a new model to test the relationship between the various dietary habits of these individuals residing in the blue zone areas and the health and longevity of these individuals. Now, the blue zones are the 4 long-lived populations which are identified around the world, and they include the Okinawa, which is the southernmost island of Japan, then the island of Icaria in Greece, and the Sardinia area in Italy, which is a mountainous part, and then the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica. Now, the observations of these blue zone communities suggest that their food culture is quite heterogeneous and it has a multiple historical influences. Now, these are the 4 blue zones which have been identified for this study. This is the Costa Rica, Italy, Greece, and Japan among the 5 blue zones which have been identified. And this is the various important part of the diet pattern which have been used across all the blue zones, and the main dietary patterns involved includes mainly the classification into the plant-based diet and the animal fat-based diet, which includes meat and the dairy products, and further the consumption of coffee, tea, as well as the calorie restriction diet. These are certain areas which have been identified, and studies have been carried out to compare the various blue zones. So here I would like to highlight and discuss the various observations and the characteristic aspects of each area. Now, coming to this Okinawa study, which is situated near Japan, the 3 main characteristics which they emphasized was the food mixtures rather than having single foods, and a combination of foods, and this included the mixed dishes of both plant and animal origin, and also the tendency to include the locally produced foods or the locally available foods than those prescribed in the handbooks. And also the edible part of pork was one of the main staple diets, and the spread of sweet potato, which was made intensive for the pig farming. So a combination or a new era of pork and sweet potato combination was introduced in the Okinawan culture, and which is even followed till today. And also, the population of Okinawa is told to have the lowest consumption of salt across Japan, because this explains the low mortality rate for the cardiovascular diseases and stroke. And they also consumed traditional seaweed varieties, which mainly includes seaweed varieties, as well as the regular consumption of soybean derived tofu, which is again due to the cultural and historical influences. And the exceptional longevity in the Okinawan population has also been reported because it is related to the calorie restricted diet which they follow. And it's also worth mentioning here that their drinking water is rich in minerals, mainly calcium, and because the soil contains limestone originating from the coral reef, and water rich in calcium and magnesium also reduces the cardiovascular mortality. Now, the second study was the Icaria study, where the Icarians followed a typical Mediterranean regimen, and the typical Mediterranean diet is so far considered as only diet which is demonstrated to have extended the lifespan, and there have been a lot of studies regarding the use of Mediterranean diet for longevity. Now, the degree of adherence to the Mediterranean model by these inhabitants is quite high, and this is definitely inversely correlated with the comorbidity and the metabolic dysfunction. And the Mediterranean diet, as you all know, it's a plant dominant diet, And also in the Icarians also followed eating the local products exclusively. And the most common fat they used was the locally produced olive oil. And this olive oil is known to have higher concentrations of polyphenols and lixitrosides and oleuropein, which is helpful to protect the blood vessels from atherosclerosis. And they have also mentioned in a few studies that Icarians consumed tea, which is obtained from the infusion of the endemic plant Sideritis which is demonstrated to have antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, and gastroprotective effect. And also, to some extent, thus it has a psychotherapeutic effect, which is similar to the serotonin and dopamine reuptake inhibitors, which could relieve anxiety, depression, and also the attention deficit disorders. So all these factors could have been contributing to the longevity diet. And also 87% of the elderly population, they are consumed boiled Greek coffee. And as we all know, coffee has the characteristic of improving the endothelial function, as well as it has a strong antioxidant action. And also they consumed moderate amount of goat meat, milk, and cheese as compared to other form of animal products. But the differentiating feature here is that there is no evidence of any appreciable calorie restriction in this Icarian diet. Coming to the next study, which was the Sardinian study, and here the Sardinians were known to have the diet which was a variant of the Mediterranean diet, where they have a relatively high consumption of animal foods, mainly cheese, meat, and pork fat, as compared to the plant-based fruits and vegetables. And it is also said to have high content of antioxidants, which is usually essentially limited to red wine and coffee. The role of calorie restriction as part of the diet in the Sardinian longevity has been hypothesized as rather than a reduction in the total number of daily calories. This population could instead be characterized by reduction in the number of hours dedicated to the food intake. As time restricted feeding, it helps to protect against various pathological conditions and also promote healthy aging. The last study was a Nicoya study where the longevity of the Niconium blue zone population exhibited male bias low mortality, and the food culture was historically derived from multiple influences like the tradition of the pre-Columbian natives who had the corn-based foods and a mixture of meat, rice, and vegetables, and also the European influence following the Spanish conquest of the country. This diet is mainly rich in the plant-based foods, but the frequency of the consumption of meat and dairy products was by no means negligible. However, rice and black beans is been the staple food for the in the Nicorian meals, and their association with low cardiovascular mortality has also been described. And it is known to have a high content of fruits such as mainly mango and papaya. In addition, surprisingly, the consumption of tubers and carbohydrate-based foods consumed by the Nicoians with low glycemic index might have delayed the onset of metabolic diseases in these individuals. And the consumption of animal protein-based products is also considerably. 79% of centenarians consume the dairy products, and the most commonly used meat was pork in moderate quantities. The Nicoians diet did not seem to be characterized by the calorie restriction, as the average energy intake of these individuals was significantly higher than in the rest of the country. The high calcium and the magnesium content In the Nicoya, drinking water also would have lowered the cardiovascular mortality rate of this population. Now, to summarize the various studies, the salient features are first, the diets which have been adopted in the various blue zones are quite different from each other, and they may be expected when considering the different historical backgrounds, the cultural traditions, and the environmental features of the population. And the prevalent consumption of self-produced foods, antioxidant-rich diets, moderate intake of pork, meat, and low consumption of fish likely result from the local availability of food resources, which is the common feature in all the studies. And also, the blue zone communities were mostly isolated throughout their history, which may be due to the limited marketing exchanges, which is insufficient also to ensure the food variety in this population. Whereas, notably, meat consumption was also moderate, and the livestock was mostly raised in the wild grass on highly biodiverse soils, making the meat more nutritious and also less harmful than that from the intensive farming which is usually followed. Also, the moderate consumption of fish was recommended in the Mediterranean model was not particularly frequent in the Icarian and Sardinian blue zones. And here, the dairy food provided adequate protein supply to maintain the lean mass and also in old age. The impact of calorie restricted diet, initially hypothesized for all four blue zone diets, was only observed in the Okinawa blue zone, but it was not documented in other communities. And one feature which was common among the blue zones is the relatively high consumption of legumes and potatoes. Now, according to the literature, a potato-rich diet is considered less healthy than many of the plant-based diets, and this is mainly attributed to the cooking method. And one of the recent articles emphasizes that potatoes, when consumed boiled and seasoned with fat, has the capacity to lower the glycemic index. However, some of the negative aspects which have been observed in the blue zone diet is an excess of saturated fat, and that may have been partly counterweight by the active lifestyle they have because of the environmental factors, and also some of the peculiar genetic factors which are present in the blue zone population may have blunted the importance of the diet as a contributing factor in longevity. Now, this table shows the various comparisons between the ethnic groups, the cultural influences, and the dietary practices among the four populations, the traditional occupation, the climate, also the daily energy intake, and the obesity rate in each of the populations, and also the frequency of intake of foods or the diet, and finally the hardness in the drinking water, which are all the contributing factors along with the and the basic diet also in longevity. Now, concluding my talk, this study concluded that the dietary patterns of long-lived populations, they did not meet the expectations, and also there is a potential for future research which is focused on the specific reasons for the long lifespan of blue zone inhabitants. The evidence which is currently available, it does not allow for recommendation or adoption of uh, any diet which could be considered as a blue zone specific diet. Now, despite these obvious challenges of adapting these diets to the general population, the investigations in the blue zones, eating regimens, and their historical evolution makes for an exciting field of study. Thanks one and all for your patient hearing. You can reach me at divyalakshmi@renix.org.
Thanks, Divya, for this nice and informative talk. The forum is open for questions. If you have any question, please type in the chat box. I don't find any question in the chat box. I would like to know, does this that we observe that there is actually variation between the diets of different blue zones. But how does this dietary variation affect their genetics? Is there any study on that?
See, I have gone into the details of only the dietary patterns and the variation of diets among the various blue zones. But definitely, the genetic factors and as I mentioned, the genetic and the environmental factors will definitely play a major role. And there would have been quite a number of studies which I have not really gone through them.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the nice presentation. Thanks, Divya.